Amen. Thank you, Greg. That scripture reading is not for the faint of heart. Lots of great names in there, and you, in a good way, you killed everyone. So that's great. It's awesome. See, back in my day when you said you killed it, it didn't mean anything good. But today, I don't know. It's like sick. That's sick, man. What? What's wrong with it? No. Never mind. Okay, so... by the way, I have one thing to say about last week. Greg alluded to a sacrifice, and it's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's a bird. It's a bird, and I don't know, something about talking about it makes me hungry for KFC. I'm not sure, but a bird flew into the pole and destabilized a fuse on the pole, and then that in turn started to throw our solar panel system, that we have electricity, that started kind of throw that off. And then that's why we had some lights on and a little hint of some air movement, but not really, At this time last week, it was 78 degrees in the sanctuary, and no air moving, felt a little bit warmer. Right now, I'm happy to report the thermostat says 71. Now, some of you might still think it's malfunctioning, but I'm thankful at least. So I hope that you're going to be back for Worship Night Wednesday. It's going to be a wonderful time. Renew Worship team has been working really hard. We're going to learn a couple new songs together, as well as sing some of the favorites that we've been singing, and some older songs, and a couple of hymns as well. But it's not just about singing. It's about saturating ourselves in the presence of God. There'll be prayer. There'll be a time of healing prayer. And I hope to see all of you here Wednesday, because you know most of the songs anyway, so I need you to help out with the rest of the congregation. I think we might have some people from the mission here as well, and a lot of people have been liking it on Facebook that I don't recognize. So I need you guys to be here so you can hopefully welcome new people and help us to just lift up the name of Jesus, okay? That's Wednesday at 7. Okay. Now, I want you to stand up real quick, because the mind can only absorb what the backside can endure. We haven't greeted each other. Find somebody that you haven't talked to yet today. Wish them a good morning, please. Morning. How are you? It's good to see you back. Thank you. How are you? Good morning. Thanks for letting me steal Giselle. Adlai, how you doing? Good to see you. Okay, you can be seated after you talk to people. You don't have to stop right now, but soon. Awesome. It's great to be part of the family of God. It was a crisp Sunday morning. The narthex, this lobby, big lobby space back here, had been completed. It wasn't quite a year old, I don't think. And everything looked fresh and new, and nice Sunday morning, pulled up into the front parking lot. And somebody the night before had taken a can of spray paint and scrawled some words over the entrance to this covered walkway over here. I forget the words exactly. I think they said, "God is dead," something like that, over this brand spanking new, fresh walkway. I think the trustees had it painted over before we all came to this service, but I remember some pretty emotional reactions that day from the people who saw it, as you can imagine. How many of you remember movies from the 1980s? Come on now. How about Ghostbusters? Have you all seen Ghostbusters? If you haven't, you better see if it's on Netflix and rent it today. Okay, so Bill Murray, I think he's the star of this. He and his boys, they've come to the end of themselves. These monsters, ghosts, are like in their heads. They're using their most cherished childhood memories, and they're transforming them into these nightmares, and they've just like, they can't anymore. And here comes the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man down Fifth Avenue, and he's just stepping on everything, and they're like, I don't know. And all of a sudden, he gets ready to squash a church. And somebody said, hey, nobody steps on a church in my town. And they sprang into action, and they started shooting down the monsters once again. It was a great moment in Ghostbusters. How about, you all are like, I don't know. Yeah, okay. How about Driving Miss Daisy? Do you remember Driving Miss Daisy? That was a great movie. I usually confuse it with Rain Man. You know, I'm an excellent driver, but different driver. Morgan Freeman's character, Hoke Colberth. He's driving Miss Daisy to Temple. It's a rainy Saturday morning, and traffic is backed up, and they can't figure out why. And Hoke gets out of the car. He's gone for a little while, comes back in the car, and he says, Miss Daisy, a sheriff up there told me that the reason that the traffic is backed up is because your temple has been bombed. Many of us remember in the news, I think it's been a year or two, there are a rash of church burnings in the South. I think that all of us who heard about those had the same kind of reaction of just feeling sick, feeling angry. What is wrong with people? What is wrong with people that they would do this? Church buildings to us, whether we're used to worshiping in a church or a cathedral or even a storefront, church buildings to us as Christians represent something. They represent the presence of God and prayer and peace and praise. They represent our faith, and so we have an understandably visceral reaction when houses of worship are violated in any way. The children of Israel had a very sacred symbol called the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God. God gave specific instructions how to build this. It was basically a big box built out of the most expensive wood at the time, acacia wood, overlaid with gold. Inside of the Ark of the Covenant was stored the testimony of God, which God himself had written on stone tablets. They included the 10 Commandments. They were stored inside the ark. On either side of the ark were carved ornate cherubim, not the sweet, chubby little angels depicted for us by the Dutch masters in the 16th century, but these were fearsome, angelic warriors. They were carved on either side of the ark. Jindal, you can go to the next slide and just leave it there. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for volunteering today, too, by the way. I appreciate it so much. These cherubim kind of buttressed either side of the Ark of the Covenant. And on top of the Ark of the Covenant was something that God called the mercy seat. And from in between these cherubim, on top of the mercy seat, the presence of God emanated in a unique way, in a visible way, and sometimes in an audible way. And God promised Moses, who was responsible for crafting the Ark of the Covenant and leading the people of Israel through the wilderness, God promised Moses that from this place I will speak to you, and you will know my presence. And God kept that promise to Moses. And God spoke to Moses from in between the cherubim on top of the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant of God. And to demonstrate God's presence to the rest of Israel, there was a big pillar of cloud, like a cyclone, that stood in front of them. At nighttime, the pillar of cloud was transformed into a pillar of fire. And when God wanted to lead his people forward, that pillar of cloud lifted up from in front of the tabernacle and went in the direction which God wanted his people to go. The presence of God, God's visible direction, and God's provision, daily provision for his people, were parts of the blessing of the presence of God among the children of Israel, because the ark of the covenant of God was in their midst, and because they acted in reverence for the Lord. These stories of the presence of God no doubt lived vividly in the minds of the children of Israel as they passed these down. But over the generations and over periods of time of being led by judges, the book of Judges, by the way, the byline was, each one did what was right in his own eyes. It was a time of anarchy. It was a time of great self-seeking. It was a time of corruption. And God would begin to want to rebuke his people and correct them. And then he would raise up a new judge who would actually follow him for a while. And there would be revival, and then there would be a turning away again, and God would try to bring his people back again. Finally, the priesthood had become corrupt, and the children of Israel were going for war against their arch enemies, the Philistines. And they called for the ark of God because they remembered these stories and they wanted a victory over the Philistines. And so the priests carried the ark of God into the camp of Israel, and Israel lost that day because God wanted to demonstrate to his people that he wasn't their vending machine. He was God Almighty. And so the priests were slain. The ark of the covenant was captured by the Philistines and placed in the temple of the Philistines' god Dagon. God decided to show his power to the Philistines, so he sent them plagues. Among them were rats everywhere. And once they were containing the rats, he sent cancerous tumors among them. And this sent everyone into, quite a frenzy. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And the priests of Dagon prayed and prayed and fasted and prayed and offered their godless sacrifices. And they prayed some more, and they left the temple, and when they came back to the temple of Dagon, their idol was smashed into pieces and laid in front of the ark of the covenant of God. Still not convinced that this wasn't just bad luck. The priests of the Philistines devised this kind of lengthy plan. They built a new cart. It was an elaborate plan. They built a new cart. They hitched up 2 milk cows to the cart. After they were finished nursing, they took the calves of the milk cows and they penned them up in the barn. And they figured among themselves, where's a milk cow going to go, right? Milk cows kind of want to go back to the barn and be with their calves. So if they just wander around and go back to the barn, then we'll know this was just bad luck. But if they go in the direction of Israel, well, then we'll know it was the hand of God. So I don't know what they did. Maybe they turned the cows around 5 times blindfolded, and then they let them go. And the scriptures say that these 2 milk cows forgot all about their calves, and they ran, mooing, all the way to the border of Israel. Abinadab picked up the ark and wheeled it into his garage. and it stayed there for about 20 years. More chaos in the land of Israel. Saul was crowned king, and then because of his great disobedience, God said, no, you're not going to be king anymore, neither is any descendant from your throne. He anointed a young shepherd boy musician named David to be king. And eventually, Saul was slain in a great battle against the Philistines. The Philistines again. David is solidifying his kingship. He's like, where is that Ark of the Covenant? You know, it would be wonderful to have the blessings of the presence of God for the whole nation. He just captured Jerusalem as the capital city for Israel. It was centrally located in the heart of Israel. And so he had it on his heart to bring in the Ark of the Covenant of God. So he located it at Abinadab's. They built a new cart for it because after all, that old Philistine cart couldn't be any good. They hitched up oxen to it, and Uzzah's moving company handled the transportation of the ark. This was parade number 1 of 2 parades. And the prevailing attitude of parade number 1 is, I got this. It's going to be good because I got this. That was kind of Uzzah's attitude. And Uzzah sent his younger brother Ahio in front of the ark, and he was walking behind the ark, and it got to a rough patch in the road, which is really hard for us Californians to imagine, a rough patch in a government-paved road. But there it was, and boom, the oxen stumbled, and the ark began to topple, and it was in danger. They thought of just falling off of the cart, and so Uzzah reached out, and boom, I got this. God said, yeah, you sure do. And he struck him down dead. Now, that doesn't seem fair. I mean, Uzzah was only trying to help a bad situation. The ark of God was going to end up broken on the side of the road, and he reached out his hand to steady the ark of God, and God strikes him dead? Wow. David's reaction was one of anger and fear based on ignorance. Who am I that the ark of God should come to me now? I don't understand this God. I don't understand his ways. And so he stopped the parade. A dude named Obed-Edom lived nearby. He had a big garage. They managed to get it to Obed-Edom's house. And David went back to Jerusalem and sulked. But see, here is the problem in parade number 1. The problem was this sacred object of God, this Ark of the Covenant, this sign of God's presence, was being treated irreverently in a way that God had not prescribed. God instructed that on the sides of the Ark of the Covenant there would be rings, and that through these rings would be poles, never to leave the Ark of the Covenant. And the Levites were to carry the ark on the poles. And not just any Levite, but Levites from one particular family had the responsibility and the honor of carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say if some Levites came up to Uzzah and said, that's not really the way you're supposed to do this ark thing. And Uzzah ignored them. Who knows? But I'll be willing to wager this, that during that 3-month period of time, there was a little bit of preparation that went into the next parade after David heard this. Obed-Edom's life turned from 0 to hero in about 10 seconds after the Ark of God was moved into his garage. I mean, he started making money. His crops came in really full, even though he wasn't even expecting them to at the time. His children got full-ride scholarships to Harvard, even though they were 5 and 7 at the time. And he went from being my size to being ripped in like 30 days. Man, his life was coming together. It was awesome, because he was enjoying the blessings of the presence of God, and God was bringing his life together in ways that he never imagined it could. And all of this news went back to King David, reminding him that David's intent was not to shut up the blessings of the presence of God for just one person, not even for him, but to share the blessings of the presence of God with the whole nation. So he went back to Obed-Edom's house to get the ark. Now this time, I promise, there is preparation. If you know a lot about David, he was a logistics kind of guy. Any guy who could run from the king, like David ran from Saul, with 300 men with him all the time. He was worried about where they were going to stay, and how he was worried about feeding them really well so nobody got grouchy and tried to stage a mutiny against him. He was a logistics guy. And so he actually employed some of his logistics. Maybe, who knows, a priest or two came to him and said, "King, this is how the Ark of the Covenant is supposed to be carried, and this is what you need to do." Because parade number 2 begins, and it begins with all the great music of parade number 1, all the great energy, all the positive vibes, and everybody going to have a good time. But this time, the Ark of the Covenant of God is not on a cart. This time it is being carried. And the scriptures say that every 6 steps, as God commanded in the book of Exodus, every 6 steps that the Ark of the Covenant took, there was a sacrifice, a bull and a fattened calf. Now, let's say that there were 5 miles. You can fact check this later. I really have no idea. Let's say that there were 5 miles between Obed-Edom's garage and the middle of Jerusalem. 5 times about 5,200 divided by 6. Isn't that a lot of sacrifices? It's in the hundreds, right? You suppose they got about a half mile out and one of the priests said, "King, we ran out of bulls." No, I really don't think that happened. And then, at the end of this thing, David gets up and blesses everybody and then hands them goodie bags, right? They all got a loaf of bread, and for the gluten-free folks, they got a cake of dates and raisins, too, all in the goodie bag, okay? So everyone could enjoy something, some sign of the blessing of God. Now, a king could decree that, but it takes time to bring that together. So I believe that there were some preparations made in this parade. But the wonderful attitude that prevailed in this parade was typified in King David, and that he danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a linen ephod. I'm not going to get into the details of that today. I don't really know them all. But what could David have worn? David was the king. He could have worn his royal robes. He could have worn his crown. He could have carried his scepter. David was also a mighty warrior. He could have had a shield bearer in front of him, like any king in a procession. He could have had his swords at his side. He could have had his purple heart and all that stuff. But he didn't. He laid all those things aside that he could have worn that represented what he was. And instead, he revealed who he was before God. He humbled himself. The Lord lifts up the proud and brings down the haughty. David knew that. And David humbled himself before the Lord and surrendered all that bit about what he was in order to be genuinely who he was in the presence of God. And then it says that he danced with all his might. He was unrestrained in the presence of God. We come to church. There's a mirror here. We come to church and we want everything to be just so. Because if everything isn't just so, we can't worship. How can you worship in a hot sanctuary? We did last week, right? How can we worship with this and this and this isn't right? How can we worship with this kind of music? How can we worship if he's up there or she's up there? And it all becomes about us and our preferences and what we like instead of about God and who we are and opening up ourselves before him. And how do we worship? Do we want to actively engage? Are we worshiping with all our might? Or are we just holding back? I'm just not feeling this song. David danced with all his might before the Lord. There was just one little fly in the ointment. Her name was Michal. In 2 Samuel 6, when it mentions Michal, it mentions that she's the daughter of Saul every time she's mentioned. She was given to King David because King David slew the great Philistine giant Goliath. When Goliath was taunting the children of Israel, King Saul sent out a decree, said, whoever slays the giant Goliath, I will give him one of my daughters in marriage, and he will never have to pay taxes again. Well, Saul's daughters weren't much to look at, but that taxes thing, man, that got the line going right there. I'm just kidding, of course. David was the only one who signed up anyway. Apparently, he'd never seen Saul's daughters. So he went out there and he killed Goliath. And Saul gave his daughter Michal to him in marriage, thinking, she's a real handful. This is going to be a lot of fun to watch. So, Michal, daughter of Saul, is not down there with her husband at the parade. She's watching from the penthouse window. She's disgusted in what she sees. At least my dad knew how to act in public as a king. I am somebody. I was raised by somebody. And I'm supposed to be somebody's somebody. But that somebody, David came back to bless his house, and he had goodie bags for the kids. And Michal stood there with scorn on her face. She couldn't even find the words to describe her contempt. She was just like SMH. I've seen some ridiculous things in my life. But this fool takes the cake. What an idiot. Out there dancing like a common person, not just in front of your servant girls, but in front of the slave girls of your servants. We can't get any lower than this. We have stooped to new depths of disgrace in this house, and you brought it here. I'm going to skip all the stuff about God chose me and not your daddy, okay? But David has a response. It was before God that I was worshiping. It was before God. I stripped myself of what was rightfully mine. I laid myself vulnerable before the Lord, and I went after him with all my might. So there are two attitudes here. There's the somebody SMH attitude. And this person exited her life stage left with no significance and no legacy. And then there's the I'm going to be genuinely who I am in the presence of God. I'm going to humble myself, and I'm going to pursue him with all of my heart. And he was identified as a person after the heart of God. That choice is ours today. Are we willing to set aside what we are and what we prefer in order to make ourselves vulnerable before the Lord and follow hard after him and enjoy the blessings of his presence in our lives? Again, there's a mirror in front of me too. When will we begin to do that? When will we begin to follow hard after God and to pursue him and to worship him with all our might? When will we begin to treat the sacred things of God, which for us are his word and the people he created? When will we treat those sacred things as God desires? When will we enjoy the blessing of the presence of God